The Amish did not split from the Mennonites because they hated the world. They split because they feared each other. The real fracture was not about buggies or buttons or beards. It was about control, about who had the right to decide when a human being stopped being family and started being a threat. In 1693, behind closed barn doors in the Swiss countryside, men who shared blood, language, and persecution turned their backs on one another, not with swords, with silence, with refusal to eat together, with the most violent weapon their culture possessed: shunning. This was not a gentle disagreement. It was a slow social execution. To understand what really happened between the Amish and the Mennonites, you have to understand the machinery that governs their world. Not written law, not police, not courts, but Ordnung. The Ordnung is not a book. It is memory. It is habit. It is what everyone knows without ever writing down. It governs what you wear, how you cut your hair, how you fasten your clothes, how you greet, how you mourn, how you bury, and how you disappear from one another's lives. Break the Ordnung, and you do not get arrested. You get erased. The Ausbund, their ancient hymnal, still sings songs written by men who were drowned, burned, and beheaded for their faith in the 1500s. Every Amish and Mennonite child grows up singing the voices of martyrs. Persecution is not history to them. It is inheritance. That trauma shaped everything. The Anabaptists, ancestors of both Amish and Mennonites, were hunted by Catholics and Protestants alike. They rejected infant baptism. They rejected oaths. They rejected military service. They rejected the marriage of church and state. For that, they were declared enemies of order. They were drowned in rivers as mockery. If you like baptism so much, drown in it. They were burned in public squares. Their children were taken and raised by state churches. Survival required discipline, not just spiritual discipline, but social discipline. They built communities that could not be infiltrated easily, communities that watched themselves more closely than any government ever could. Out of that fear was born the ban, Meidung, shunning. If you endangered the group would make you vanish. By the late 1600s, Mennonite communities in Switzerland and Alsace had stabilized. They were no longer constantly fleeing. They were farming, trading, marrying, raising children. Stability, to some, looked like compromise. Jacob Ammon did not trust stability. Ammon was a tailor, not a scholar. He was not educated in universities. He was educated by fear, by the memory of persecution, and by what he believed was spiritual decay. He looked at Mennonite men trimming their beards, at women wearing slightly brighter cloth, at families eating with people who had been excommunicated, and he saw betrayal. To Ammon, survival meant sharp edges, no softness, no gray zones. The Mennonite elders, especially Hans Reist, believed survival meant flexibility. They had seen enough blood to know that rigidity could also kill. The battlefield was not doctrine alone, it was daily life. A button was not just a button, it was a signal of conformity to fashion, which meant conformity to the world. A trimmed beard was not grooming, it was vanity. Eating with someone who had been banned was not kindness. It was contamination. The sharpest blade was Meidung. Mennonites practiced discipline, but with restraint. If someone was banned, they were excluded from communion, from leadership, from spiritual authority. But families could still eat together. Husbands could still share a table with banned wives. Parents could still feed banned children. Ammon called that disobedience to Christ. He insisted that Matthew 18 meant total separation. No meals, no business, no greetings, no soft words, even between husband and wife. That meant marriage itself could be suspended by the church. This is where the fracture became irreversible. In 1693, Ammon traveled through Swiss Mennonite settlements demanding agreement. He did not negotiate, he tested. Those who refused strict shunning were excommunicated on the spot. Elders who had baptized him were declared unfaithful. Letters were sent accusing leaders of betraying Christ. In barns and homes, people who had worshipped together for generations suddenly found themselves unable to eat together. Families split at the table. Some obeyed Ammon, some obeyed Reist. Some obeyed neither and were crushed between them. Imagine being a child and watching your father refuse to sit with your uncle because the church told him not to. Imagine your mother cooking two separate meals in the same house. This was not theology. This was psychological warfare. Ammon's followers began meeting separately. They did not call themselves Amish. That name was used later by their enemies, but they accepted the separation. They believed that purity required pain. Reist's group believed that compassion was not weakness. Both believed the other was risking damnation. The split was not clean. It dragged on for years. Accusations crossed borders. Letters circulated warning people who to avoid. Some who first followed Ammon later repented of how harshly he acted, but not of what he believed. They asked forgiveness for method, not for rule. That tells you everything. By the early 1700s, the division was real. Amish and Mennonites were no longer one people. They were two branches growing from the same wound. Then came migration. Pennsylvania offered what Europe never could: space without constant terror. Both Amish and Mennonites crossed the Atlantic carrying their trauma with them. They did not come to become American. They came to survive as themselves. In the New World, the old wounds did not heal. They adapted. Amish communities grew inward. They built walls of habits so thick that time itself could not easily enter. Mennonites grew outward, slowly, carefully. They experimented with schools, with mission work, with technology, with engagement. The old argument replayed itself every generation. Is survival about resisting change or choosing which change to allow? Amish answered by tightening. Mennonites answered by sorting. Among Mennonites, some became almost Amish in lifestyle. Others became indistinguishable from modern Protestants. The spectrum widened. Among Amish, the spectrum narrowed. Uniformity became protection. Clothing became law. Not just modesty, but sameness. If everyone looks the same, no one stands out. If no one stands out, no one breaks. Hooks and eyes replaced buttons. Broadfall trousers replaced zippers. Women's dresses stayed long, solid-colored, unshaped. Men grew beards after marriage, but never mustaches, because mustaches once meant soldiers. Every detail became a declaration. We are not them. The Ordnung hardened. Technology was not rejected because it was evil. It was rejected because it weakened dependence on the group. Electricity meant you could entertain yourself alone. Cars meant you could leave without asking. Phones meant you could speak without being seen. Independence was the enemy. Mennonites disagreed. Not all of them, but many. They saw technology as a tool, not a master. They believed separation was spiritual, not mechanical. That difference widened the emotional distance between the groups. In Amish eyes, Mennonites looked like the old Swiss Mennonites who had gone soft before Ammon. History was repeating. In Mennonite eyes, Amish looked frozen, guarding a fear that no longer had a clear enemy. But the friction was never just about lifestyle. It was about authority. Who has the right to tell a grown person how to live? Amish answered, the church, through the Ordnung, because without obedience, there is no community. Mennonites answered, the church, but with room for conscience. That difference shows most clearly in how each treats disobedience. Amish still practice strict Meidung. If you join the church and later break its rules by marrying outside, adopting forbidden technology, rejecting discipline, you are shunned, not hated, not cursed, simply erased. No eating together, no business, no casual talk. Even parents must limit contact. It is meant to save your soul by making your life unbearable without repentance. Mennonites, even conservative ones, usually reject this level of control. They may remove someone from membership, but family bonds remain intact. This difference shapes personality. Amish children grow up knowing that belonging is conditional. Love is real, but obedience is required to keep it. Mennonite children grow up with more room to fail without disappearing. Neither path is painless. They simply distribute pain differently. The Amish absorb it inside the group. Mennonites absorb it in conflict with the world. And still, they recognize each other. They share bloodlines, surnames, accents, hymns, martyr stories, foods, memories of persecution. But when they meet, there is often a quiet tension, not hatred. Recognition of an old argument that never ended. Each believes the other chose the wrong way to survive. And the truth is harder than either admits. The Amish preserved community by freezing it. The Mennonites preserved faith by letting it move. Both paid a price. Families were divided, lives were narrow, futures were negotiated by ancestors long dead. What really happened between the Amish and the Mennonites is not a story of simplicity. It is a story of fear, discipline, love, and control, colliding inside people who only wanted to stay faithful in a world that kept trying to erase them. And the echoes of that collision still decide who eats with whom, who speaks to whom, and who is allowed to exist inside the circle today. The fracture did not end in 1693. It metastasized. Every generation that followed inherited not just faith, but a wound that kept reopening whenever the world changed faster than their rules. In America, the soil was new, but the fear was old. Mennonites, scattered through Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, and later Kansas and Canada, began to test how much of the outside world could be touched without being absorbed by it. Some adopted meeting houses instead of home worship. Some allowed formal schooling beyond the 8th grade. Some embraced mission work and evangelism, believing faith should move outward instead of folding inward. Each decision reopened the old argument Jacob Ammon had started. Does engagement weaken holiness or prove it? Among the Amish, the answer remained rigid. They watched Mennonites build churches with steeples. They watched Mennonite youth attend high schools and colleges. They watched Mennonite families drive cars and speak English instead of Pennsylvania German. To the Amish, this did not look like evolution. It looked like the same slow leak that had nearly destroyed their ancestors. So they sealed themselves tighter. By the mid-1800s, even Amish unity fractured. Ironically, they split the way Mennonites had, over change. Some Amish wanted Sunday schools, meeting houses, better farming tools, more education. Others said even these small steps would start the old slide. Between 1850 and 1878, Amish communities broke apart. The progressives became known as Amish Mennonites. They kept some Amish customs but moved toward Mennonite structure. By the early 1900s, most of them had fully merged into Mennonite conferences and dropped the word Amish entirely. The conservatives became what the world now calls Old Order Amish. The name itself is a declaration, not just old, but ordered. From that point forward, the Amish identity was defined not by theology alone, but by resistance. No cars, no electricity from public lines, no radios, no television, no college, no salaried professions, no fashion. Not because these things were sinful, but because they dissolved the web of dependence that held the group together. A farmer who needs his neighbors survives differently than a man who can buy anything with money. A child who learns only practical skills stays rooted differently than one trained for distant careers. Amish society is engineered to make leaving emotionally and economically expensive. Mennonite society is engineered to let people move while staying spiritually connected. This difference became visible in youth. Amish developed what outsiders now sensationalize as Rumspringa. It was not designed as rebellion, it was a controlled gap in authority. Unbaptized youth were not yet bound by the Ordnung. They could taste the world before choosing. The choice was weighted. Leave before baptism, and you might be sad, but you are not shunned. Leave after baptism, and you are cut off. This makes baptism not just a religious moment, but a social contract with teeth. Mennonites also practice adult baptism, but without the same permanent social trap. A Mennonite who leaves the church may disappoint family, but they are rarely erased. This difference alone creates two kinds of courage. Amish youth must decide knowing the cost is permanent. Mennonite youth decide knowing the door never fully locks. Psychologically, that shapes how people think about freedom. Among Amish, freedom is terrifying. It costs everything. Among Mennonites, freedom is dangerous, but survivable. This affects marriage too. Amish almost never marry outside, not just because it is forbidden, but because leaving means losing parents, siblings, neighbors, and the only life you know. Mennonites marry outside more often, especially in moderate and progressive groups. They may change churches, they may stop attending, but they rarely lose their family entirely. This difference makes Amish families tighter and more fragile. Tighter because everyone depends on everyone. Fragile because one serious break can tear a family apart forever. This is the hidden friction outsiders never see. The Amish are not simply peaceful farmers. They live inside a system where love and discipline are intertwined so tightly that you cannot pull them apart. Mennonites are not simply Amish with cars. They live inside a system that allows disagreement without total exile. Each system produces different kinds of suffering. Amish suffering is quiet and private. A banned son sits alone at a table. A banned daughter watches her mother walk past without greeting her. No screaming, no violence, just absence. Mennonite suffering is louder. Families argue, churches split, people leave and join and leave again. Identity becomes fluid, and with fluidity comes confusion. One preserves unity by sacrifice of individuality. The other preserves individuality by sacrificing unity. Both call it faithfulness. The original argument between Ammon and Reist never ended. It simply learned new language. Cars instead of buttons, internet instead of beards, college instead of communion frequency. Every time a Mennonite conference votes to allow something new, conservative voices whisper, "This is how it started in Switzerland." Every time an Amish Ordnung tightens, progressive Anabaptists whisper, "This is how control becomes cruelty." They rarely say this to each other, but they feel it. Even humanitarian work reveals the difference. Mennonites built global relief networks. Mennonite Central Committee feeds refugees, builds homes, responds to wars and disasters. Amish also help, but locally, quietly, without organization, often through Mennonite channels because they avoid bureaucracy. When they work together, they recognize each other's hands, but they do not share the same vision of what faith should look like in public. For Mennonites, faith should move outward. For Amish, faith should grow deeper inward. This makes their cooperation respectful, but cautious. There is also quiet resentment. Some Amish feel Mennonites used Amish image for attention and fundraising while abandoning the discipline that made that image possible. Some Mennonites feel Amish preserve a romantic image of Anabaptism, while ignoring its call to witness and justice in the wider world. Each believes the other betrayed something sacred, and still, they share ancestors. They share hymns. They share stories of drowning, burning, hiding in forests. They share the same Bible verses. They share the same language roots. They share the same fear that the world will swallow them whole. The Amish answer that fear by building walls. The Mennonites answer it by building bridges. Walls protect but isolate. Bridges connect but but expose. This is not a moral contest. It is a survival strategy contest, and survival always creates friction. What began in 1693 as a fight over shunning became a blueprint for how to handle danger, by closing ranks or opening doors. Neither side won. Both are still running from the same ghosts, and those ghosts still decide who gets to sit at the table, who gets to speak, and who must disappear in silence when they choose differently. The friction between Amish and Mennonites is not loud. It does not explode in riots or public accusations. It exists in glances, in silence, in the way one group talks about the other when no outsiders are listening. It lives in sermons that never name names but draw lines. It lives in the way children are warned about those who went too far, or those who did not go far enough. It is a tension inherited, not chosen, passed down like eye color or accent. In Amish memory, the Mennonites are often remembered as the ones who loosened. Not all Mennonites, but enough to justify caution. The story is told in fragments. They allowed buttons, then cars, then schools, then television, then anything. Each step is remembered not as adaptation, but as erosion. In this memory, every Mennonite innovation is a warning sign that Ammon saw before anyone else did. In Mennonite memory, the Amish are often remembered as the ones who froze, not spiritually frozen, but socially. They are described as guarding rules long after the original danger passed. In this memory, Amish strictness is no longer courage but habit, no longer sacrifice but fear of letting go. The Amish are admired for their discipline, but quietly pitied for the narrowness of their world. These are not academic disagreements. They affect real people in real families. There are families with Amish grandparents and Mennonite grandchildren. There are cousins who grew up speaking the same dialect, eating the same food, singing the same hymns, then grew apart because one side allowed electricity and the other did not. At reunions, conversations become careful. Some topics are avoided. Some jokes are not told. Clothing alone becomes a statement that cannot be ignored. A Mennonite woman wearing a modern dress may feel Amish eyes on her, not in anger, but in evaluation. An Amish man arriving by buggy at a Mennonite event feels watched, not as a guest, but as a symbol. Each knows what the other represents, a choice they did not make. This is the quiet violence of cultural division. It is not blood, it is distance, and distance hurts most when you know exactly who is on the other side. The friction deepens around authority. In Amish life, authority is local and absolute. Each church district has its own Ordnung. What is allowed in one valley may be forbidden in the next. But within that district, the Ordnung is not debated publicly. It is accepted or you leave. This creates obedience, but also fear of questioning. Mennonite authority is layered. Conferences debate, churches vote, members argue, split, and reorganize. This creates freedom, but also instability. There is always another group that believes slightly differently. There is always another door to walk through. Amish see this as weakness. Mennonites see it as conscience. When Amish leaders speak of Mennonites, they often describe them as scattered, not geographically, but spiritually. Too many paths, too many interpretations, too much room for self. When Mennonite leaders speak of Amish, they often describe them as closed, not cruel, but sealed. Too little room for difference, too much fear of change. Both are speaking about the same problem. How much control is too much and how much freedom is too dangerous. The answer shapes mental life. Amish children grow up learning to suppress personal preference. You wear what is given. You work where you are needed. You speak when it is appropriate. You learn early that peace comes from blending in. This produces calm. It also produces silence. Mennonite children grow up learning to choose church, career, even how closely they will follow tradition. They learn to explain themselves, defend themselves, and sometimes reinvent themselves. This produces creativity. It also produces anxiety. One system protects people from choice by limiting it. The other gives choice and asks people to carry its weight. Neither is painless. The original split over shunning still casts its shadow. In Amish communities, Meidung is not theoretical. It happens. People disappear from family life. Chairs remain empty. Names are no longer spoken easily. Children are taught not to greet certain relatives. It is described as love, and in its own logic, it is love that punishes to save. But it leaves scars that are rarely discussed openly. Some banned people return, broken enough to be welcomed back. Others leave and build new lives, carrying grief that has no language in their old world. Mennonites rejected this level of control because they had seen what it did. They believed discipline should correct, not destroy. They believed relationships should survive disagreement, but this also created new pain. Families divided by belief but still sitting at the same table, unable to fully agree or fully separate. The Amish chose clean cuts. Mennonites chose messy living. Clean cuts heal faster but leave missing pieces. Messy living keeps everyone, but never lets wounds fully close. The old decision in 1693 was not about foot washing or communion frequency. It was about which kind of pain a community was willing to live with. Ammon chose pain through separation. Raist chose pain through tolerance. Both choices are still being paid for. 3 centuries later, even language shows the divide. Amish still speak Pennsylvania German in daily life. It binds them to ancestors and to each other. English is for outsiders. Mennonites shifted to English long ago. It opened them to the world but loosened the grip of ancestral voice. Language is not just communication. It is memory. When language changes, memory changes with it. Amish memory is thick and slow. Mennonite memory is thinner but wider. And still, they sing from the same old songs. The Ausbund hymns, written by prisoners and martyrs, are sung by Amish in long, slow tones that stretch time. Mennonites sing many of the same hymns, but faster, often with harmony, sometimes with instruments. Even in song, you can hear the split. One clings to endurance, the other to expression. Neither is wrong, but they are no longer the same. What really happened between the Amish and the Mennonites is not a single break. It is a pattern that keeps repeating. Fear of loss, followed by a decision, followed by a life shaped around that decision. Every Amish child inherits Ammon's fear. Every Mennonite child inherits Raist's gamble. One says, hold tighter. The other says, move carefully. And between them is a long memory of persecution, love, and the terrible knowledge that survival always costs something. The hardest truth is this: neither the Amish nor the Mennonites are living exactly the life their ancestors imagined. Both are living compromises shaped by fear, memory, and necessity. The Amish did not freeze time because they loved the past. They froze it because movement once meant death. The Mennonites did not open to the world because they loved change. They opened because isolation once meant extinction. Each path was carved by trauma, not theory. Outsiders romanticize the Amish as symbols of peace and simplicity. They see quilts, buggies, barns, and smiles. They do not see the cost of belonging. They do not see the young man who leaves and never hears his mother's voice again. They do not see the girl who stays but wonders what she might have been. They do not see how obedience can feel like safety and prison at the same time. Outsiders romanticize Mennonites as gentle progressives, peaceful activists, kind neighbors. They do not see the quiet fractures in families who believe differently. They do not see churches splitting again and again, each convinced it is the faithful remnant. They do not see how freedom can feel like drifting, how choice can feel like loneliness when there is no single voice telling you who you are. The Amish preserved community by narrowing the road until everyone walks almost the same way. That creates strength, but it also creates fragility. When one person stumbles, the whole system feels threatened. The community becomes defensive not because it hates difference, but because difference reminds it of how easily everything could unravel. The Mennonites preserved faith by widening the road and letting many paths exist side by side. That creates flexibility, but it also creates confusion. When everyone chooses differently, unity becomes harder to define. Faith becomes personal, but community becomes negotiable. Some thrive in that freedom. Others feel lost inside it. The real friction between the Amish and Mennonites is not anger. It is grief. Grief over what each side believes the other has lost. The Amish grieve what they see as Mennonites surrender to the world. The Mennonites grieve what they see as Amish surrender to fear. Both believe they are watching cousins slowly disappear. This is why their relationship is never neutral. It is layered with memory, disappointment, respect, and quiet judgment. When they meet, they see not just people, but alternate futures. Each is a mirror showing what the other might have become, and neither can fully accept that mirror. The tragedy is that both are right about each other. The Mennonites did lose something when they loosened discipline. They lost the power of sameness, the deep comfort of knowing exactly where you belong without asking. They lost the thick cultural walls that protect against loneliness. They gained freedom, but they paid with fragmentation. The Amish did lose something when they hardened discipline. They lost flexibility, the ability to adapt without fear. They lost many sons and daughters who could not live inside the narrow road. They gained unity, but they paid with silence and absence. What really happened between the Amish and the Mennonites is not a story of villains and heroes. It is a story of two survival strategies born from the same terror. One chose to hide, one chose to negotiate. Both choices saved lives. Both choices broke hearts. The split in 1693 was not just a historical event. It was a psychological decision that still shapes how people love, obey, leave, and stay. It decides whether a mistake costs you a conversation or a family. It decides whether faith feels like a shelter or a journey. If you look closely, you will see that both communities are still answering the same question their ancestors faced in Europe. How do you stay faithful in a world that does not want you? The Amish answer, by becoming so strong inside that the outside cannot pull you apart. The Mennonites answer, by learning to live inside the outside without losing your soul. Neither answer is complete, both are expensive, and that is the forbidden truth of plain life. Peace is not natural, it is engineered, and every design has a price. When you see a buggy on a road or a Mennonite church on a street corner, you are not seeing simplicity. You are seeing the afterimage of fear, love, control, courage, and centuries of choosing between two kinds of pain. The Amish and the Mennonites did not drift apart because they were different. They drifted apart because they were too similar, and they disagreed on what similarity was supposed to protect. One chose walls, one chose bridges, and both are still walking forward, carrying the weight of a decision made long before they were born, trying to live good lives inside a story that never truly ended.